The thunder cracked overhead as Delilah Forrester's wagon wheels sank deeper into the relentless mud, her desperate pleas for help swallowed by the howling Wyoming wind of 1876. The rain hammered down mercilessly, turning the already treacherous trail into a bottomless quagmire that threatened to consume her only remaining possessions, and perhaps her last hopes of starting anew. Delilah's hands were raw and blistered from her futile attempts to free the wagon. Her honey-blonde hair, once neatly pinned, now hung in sodden ropes around her face. The two weary mules brayed in protest as she urged them forward, but their efforts only drove the wheels deeper into the muck. "Come on," she shouted above the storm, her voice breaking. "Please, just a little more." She was still 20 miles from Riverton, Wyoming her destination and hopefully her salvation. The letter in her pocket, now damp and fragile, promised a teaching position that would allow her to build a new life after the devastating fire that had claimed her parents' home in St. Louis. But now, stranded in this desolate stretch between nowhere and somewhere, that future seemed as unreachable as the stars hidden behind the storm clouds. Delilah slumped against the wagon, letting the rain mingle with her tears of frustration. Just as she was considering whether to abandon her possessions and attempt to lead the mules toward town on foot, the sound of hoofbeats penetrated the cacophony of the storm. Through the curtain of rain emerged a silhouette on horseback, tall, broad-shouldered, and moving with purposeful speed. As the rider drew closer, Delilah could make out a man wearing a dark slicker, his hat pulled low against the downpour. "Looks like you could use some help, madam," the deep voice called out as he dismounted in one fluid motion. Even in the poor light, Delilah could see his face was weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of a summer sky and a jawline that spoke of determination. Despite her predicament, she couldn't help but notice how his presence seemed to command the very storm around them. "I've been stuck for hours," she admitted, attempting to straighten her disheveled appearance. "The wheel's buried halfway to China, I fear." The stranger surveyed the situation with a practiced eye. "Name's Levi Yates," he said, tipping his hat briefly before turning his attention to the mired wagon. "Got a ranch about 5 miles east of here." "Delilah Forrester," she replied, watching as he examined the sunken wheel. "I'm headed to Riverton for a teaching position." Levi nodded, his expression unreadable as he took the reins of his horse and led the powerful animal to the back of the wagon. "Picked a mighty poor day for traveling, Miss Forrester." "The weather was fine when I set out this morning," she defended, raising her voice over another crash of thunder. "It changed so quickly." "Wyoming weather's like a woman's heart," he said with a hint of a smile. "Beautiful one moment, fierce as hell the next." Delilah raised an eyebrow. "I wouldn't know about that, Mr. Yates, but I do know I need to reach Riverton by tomorrow." Levi tied his horse to the back of the wagon and rolled up his sleeves, revealing muscled forearms bronzed by the sun. "We'll have you out in no time," he assured her, though his expression suggested otherwise as he studied the deeply embedded wheels. For the next half hour, Levi worked methodically, digging around the wheels, placing boards beneath them for traction, and repositioning the mules. Delilah insisted on helping despite his protests, and soon they were both covered in mud from head to toe. "On my count," Levi instructed as they prepared for another attempt. 1, 2, 3. The mules strained forward as Levi and Delilah pushed from behind. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden lurch, the wagon broke free from the mud's grasp, nearly sending Delilah face first into the muck. Levi's strong hand caught her arm, steadying her as the wagon rolled onto firmer ground. "We did it!" Delilah exclaimed, relief washing over her like a warm tide. Levi's eyes met hers, and something unspoken passed between them, a connection forged in mutual effort and success. "Told you we would," he said, his voice gentler than before. Then, looking at the darkening sky and the treacherous road ahead, he added words that would change the course of both their lives. "I'll get you through, Miss Forrester. All the way to Riverton." The rain continued to fall as they stood there, two strangers brought together by circumstance, neither aware of the journey that lay ahead, a journey that would test their courage, challenge their hearts, and perhaps lead to something neither had been searching for but both desperately needed. "I couldn't possibly ask that of you," Delilah protested, though the prospect of facing the remainder of the journey alone was daunting. "You've already done more than enough." Levi untied his horse and swung up into the saddle with practiced ease. "Not asking, madam. The trail ahead gets worse before it gets better, and there's a section near Eagle Creek that's likely washed out by now. You'd never make it through alone." His tone left no room for argument. "I'll lead the way. My horse knows this territory better than most men do." Delilah hesitated only briefly before climbing back onto the wagon seat. "Thank you, Mr. Yates. I won't forget this kindness." As they set off, the rain gradually subsided, though dark clouds still loomed ominously overhead. Levi rode slightly ahead, occasionally glancing back to ensure Delilah was managing. The trail wound through rugged terrain, a landscape of jagged rock formations, sprawling sagebrush, and occasional stands of pine that seemed to cling precariously to the hillsides. "You're new to Wyoming, I take it?" Levi called back after they had traveled in silence for some time. "Is it that obvious?" Delilah replied, negotiating a particularly rough patch of trail. "Most folks born here know better than to travel these parts alone, especially with weather turning." "I didn't have much choice," she admitted. "The position in Riverton was offered rather suddenly, and I had to leave St. Louis quickly." Levi slowed his horse to ride alongside the wagon. "Running from something, Miss Forrester," Delilah stiffened. "Not running, Mr. Yates, moving forward." "There's a difference." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Fair enough. We all have our reasons for ending up in these parts." As the afternoon wore on, the landscape began to change. The trail descended into a narrow valley where cottonwoods lined a swollen creek. The water rushed by with alarming speed, carrying branches and debris from upstream. Levi held up his hand, signaling Delilah to stop. "Eagle Creek," he explained, dismounting to inspect the crossing. "Just as I feared, the normal ford is too dangerous now." Delilah peered anxiously at the churning water. "What do we do?" "There's another crossing about a mile upstream. It's narrower but has a more solid bottom. We'll try there." The detour took them through dense undergrowth, branches scraping against the wagon as they went. By the time they reached the alternative crossing, the light was beginning to fade. "We'll need to hurry," Levi said, eyeing the darkening sky. "Night comes fast in these mountains, and we're still a good 15 miles from Riverton." The creek crossing, while safer than the main ford, was still treacherous. Levi waded in first, testing the depth and current. "Follow exactly in my tracks," he instructed. "Keep the mules steady and don't stop midway." Delilah gripped the reins tightly, her heart pounding as she guided the wagon into the rushing water. The mules balked initially, but with Levi's encouragement from ahead, they moved forward. Water swirled around the wagon wheels, rising halfway up the spokes as they reached the middle of the crossing. For a terrifying moment, the current caught the wagon, pushing it sideways. Delilah fought to keep the mules straight, her arms aching with the effort. "Hold steady," Levi called, turning his horse back toward her. "You're doing fine." His confidence bolstered her own, and with a final surge of effort from the mules, the wagon climbed the opposite bank to safety. Delilah released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Well done," Levi said, genuine admiration in his voice. Not many newcomers would have handled that crossing so skillfully. Delilah felt an unexpected warmth at his praise. "I grew up helping my father with our farm. I'm not entirely unfamiliar with challenging situations." As they continued on, the clouds finally broke, revealing a spectacular sunset that painted the western sky in hues of gold, crimson, and violet. The rain-washed landscape sparkled in the fading light, and for the first time since meeting Levi, Delilah saw the beauty that could exist in this harsh territory. "It's magnificent," she murmured. "This is Wyoming's way of apologizing for trying to drown you earlier," Levi replied with a smile that transformed his serious face. "She's temperamental but rewarding once you learn her ways." They traveled until darkness made further progress unsafe. Levi guided them to a sheltered spot beneath a cluster of pines where the ground was relatively dry. "We'll camp here tonight," he announced. "We could push on to Riverton, but these trails can be treacherous in the dark, especially after a rain." Delilah nodded her agreement, though anxiety gnawed at her. "I was supposed to meet with the school board tomorrow morning." "We'll get you there," Levi assured her as he began unloading supplies from his saddlebags. "Might be a bit mud-splattered, but you'll make it." With practiced efficiency, Levi set about making camp, gathering firewood, building a small fire, and unsaddling his horse. Delilah contributed by preparing a simple meal from her provisions, grateful to have something useful to do. As they sat by the fire eating beans and hardtack, Delilah found herself studying her unexpected companion. In the flickering light, the harsh lines of his face softened, revealing a handsome profile that seemed more suited to an artist's rendering than a rugged rancher. "Have I got beans on my face?" Levi asked, catching her gaze. Delilah flushed, embarrassed at being caught staring. "No, I was just thinking how strange it is that we're here together. This morning I was completely alone, and now—" "Life out here has a way of throwing people together," he replied. "Sometimes for the better, sometimes not. Survival often depends on the kindness of strangers." "And which category do you fall into, Mr. Yates? The better or the not?" A shadow passed over his face. "That's not for me to say." "I've made my share of mistakes. Haven't we all?" Delilah said softly. "My father used to say it's not the mistakes that define us, but how we mend them." Levi prodded the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. "Wise man, your father." "He was," she agreed, a pang of grief sharpening her voice. "I miss his counsel now more than ever." Sensing her sadness, Levi changed the subject. "So, teaching in Riverton, what subjects?" "Grateful for the diversion," Delilah explained. "General education for the younger children, but I've been told they're particularly in need of someone who can teach literature and mathematics to the older ones." "Seems Riverton's getting more civilized by the day," Levi observed. "When I first came through 5 years ago, it was little more than a trading post and a saloon. And now, what should I expect?" Levi considered this. "It's growing fast. The railroad's bringing new folks almost weekly. There's a proper hotel now, 2 churches, a bank. Even talk of a newspaper starting up." He paused, then added, "But it's still the frontier, Miss Forrester. Don't mistake it for St. Louis." "I'm not naive, Mr. Yates," Delilah assured him. "I understand I'm stepping into a different world." "Didn't say you were naive," he corrected. "Just making sure you're prepared. Wyoming can be harsh on those who come with too many expectations." Their conversation continued as the fire burned low, moving from Riverton's development to Levi's ranch, and the challenges of raising cattle in Wyoming's unpredictable climate. Delilah found herself genuinely interested in his stories of blizzards and drought, predators and cattle thieves. For his part, Levi listened attentively as she spoke of her teaching experiences in St. Louis and her hopes for building something meaningful in Riverton. As the night deepened, exhaustion finally overtook them. Levi insisted that Delilah take shelter in the wagon while he slept on the ground near the fire. Despite her protests, he was adamant. "Get some rest, Miss Forrester," he said firmly. "Tomorrow will come early, and we still have a long journey ahead." Delilah climbed into the wagon, arranging her bedroll atop her trunks and boxes. Through a gap in the canvas covering, she could see Levi settling by the fire, his hat pulled down over his eyes. Something about his solitary figure stirred an unexpected emotion within her, not pity, but a kind of recognition. Despite his capable exterior and apparent self-sufficiency, she sensed in him the same loneliness that had been her constant companion since losing her parents. With that thought lingering in her mind, Delilah drifted into sleep, lulled by the distant hooting of an owl and the occasional snap of the dying fire. She awoke to the aroma of coffee and the soft sounds of morning birdsong, the gentle nickering of horses, the rustle of leaves in a light breeze. For a moment, disoriented by sleep, she forgot where she was. Then reality rushed back as she heard Levi's voice outside the wagon. "Morning, Miss Forrester," he called. "Sun's up, and so should you be if we're to reach Riverton in time for your meeting." Delilah hastily straightened her rumpled clothing and attempted to tame her hair before emerging from the wagon. The sight that greeted her was unexpected. Levi had not only prepared coffee, but was also frying bacon and what appeared to be johnny cakes on a small skillet over the rekindled fire. "You cook?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. Levi glanced up, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Man living alone either learns to cook or starves, Miss Forrester, and I've never been partial to starving." As they ate breakfast, Delilah noticed how the morning light revealed new aspects of her companion. His hair, freed from his hat, was a rich brown with sun-bleached streaks. A thin scar ran along his jawline, barely visible beneath several days' worth of stubble. Most striking, though, were his eyes, clear blue and observant, missing nothing. "You're staring again," he noted, passing her a tin cup of coffee. "I apologize," Delilah said quickly. "I was just thinking how different you look in daylight." "Better or worse?" he asked with unexpected directness. The question caught her off guard, and she answered truthfully before she could think better of it. "Better. Definitely better." A fleeting smile crossed his face before he returned to his practical manner. "We should pack up. Storm's past, but the trail will still be challenging in places." They worked together efficiently, breaking camp and readying for departure. As Delilah secured her belongings in the wagon, a small leather-bound book fell to the ground. Levi picked it up before she could reach it, glancing at the title. "Tennyson," he said, handing it back to her. "Wouldn't have pegged you for poetry." Delilah accepted the book, surprised by his recognition of the author. "It was my mother's favorite. You're familiar with Tennyson?" Levi busied himself with checking the wagon wheels. "Contrary to what you might think, Miss Forrester, not all of us out here are uneducated heathens." "I never suggested," she began, but he cut her off with a wave of his hand. "No offense taken. Let's get moving." The morning journey proved less eventful than the previous day's travels. The sky remained clear. A brilliant blue canopy stretched over the vast landscape. Levi rode beside the wagon rather than ahead, pointing out landmarks and sharing bits of local knowledge that Delilah found herself eagerly absorbing. "See that ridge to the north?" he asked, indicating a distant formation. "The Arapaho believe it was formed by a great serpent that once crawled across the land. When the sun god struck it down, its body turned to stone." "Is that true?" Delilah asked, fascinated by the tale. Levi shrugged. "Geologists would say otherwise, but I've always thought there's often truth buried in such stories, just not always the kind you can prove with science. Around midday, they stopped to rest the animals beside a clear stream. As Delilah splashed cool water on her face, she caught Levi watching her with an unreadable expression. "What is it?" she asked. He seemed to hesitate before speaking. "Just wondering what brings a woman like you to a place like Riverton. Teaching position or not, it's a far cry from St. Louis." Delilah dried her hands on her skirt, considering how much to share. "After my parents died in the fire, there was little left for me in St. Louis. No family, few true friends, and too many memories." She met his gaze directly. "Sometimes the only way forward is to start anew somewhere completely different." Levi nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know something about that. And you?" she ventured. "What brought you to Wyoming?" "War," he answered simply. "After Appomattox, I couldn't go back to Virginia. Too much had changed, including me." He looked away, focusing on the distant horizon. "Came west looking for open spaces and fewer ghosts." "Did you find what you were looking for?" A long moment passed before he answered. "Found something. Not sure yet if it's what I was looking for." He straightened, effectively ending the conversation. "We should move on if we're to reach Riverton by afternoon." As they continued their journey, the landscape gradually shifted. The rugged wilderness began to give way to occasional fenced pastures, and they passed several small homesteads, evidence of encroaching civilization. By mid-afternoon, a thin smudge of smoke on the horizon signaled their approach to Riverton. "That's it?" Delilah asked, a mixture of anticipation and apprehension in her voice. "That's it," Levi confirmed. "Your new home." The word home stirred complex emotions in Delilah. Would this frontier town truly become her home? Could any place feel like home again after all she had lost? As if sensing her thoughts, Levi added, "It's not much compared to what you're used to, but there are good people there. People who'll value a teacher with your dedication." "How do you know I'm dedicated?" she asked, genuinely curious about his assessment. He smiled slightly. "No one crosses half a continent to teach in a frontier town, unless they're serious about their calling." His confidence in her bolstered Delilah's spirits as they approached the outskirts of Riverton. The town materialized slowly, first a scattering of outlying structures, then more substantial buildings lining a wide main street. Compared to St. Louis, it was indeed modest, but it possessed a certain vibrancy that surprised her. People bustled about their business. Wagons and riders moved up and down the street, and the sounds of construction could be heard from several locations. "It's bigger than I expected," Delilah admitted as they made their way toward the center of town. "Told you it was growing," Levi replied. "Railroads changed everything. Where to first?" "The school." Delilah consulted the letter in her pocket. "The letter says to meet Mr. Howard at the Riverton Hotel. He's the head of the school board." Levi guided them toward a 2-story wooden structure with a freshly painted sign proclaiming it the Riverton Hotel. As they pulled up in front, Delilah became acutely aware of her bedraggled appearance, mud-stained traveling clothes, wind-blown hair, and face reddened by sun and weather. "I can't meet Mr. Howard looking like this," she said, dismayed. "You look like someone who braved Wyoming's worst to get here on time," Levi countered. "That'll count for more with Howard than fancy clothes would. He values grit." Before Delilah could respond, the hotel door opened, and a portly man with impressive mustaches emerged, squinting at them curiously. "You must be Miss Forrester," he called, approaching the wagon. "We'd nearly given up on you after that storm yesterday." Delilah climbed down from the wagon, extending her hand. "Mr. Howard, I presume?" "Yes, I'm Delilah Forrester. I apologize for my appearance, but as you mentioned, the storm made travel rather challenging." Howard shook her hand firmly. "No apologies necessary. We're just glad you made it safely." His gaze shifted to Levi. "Yates, didn't expect to see you in town so soon after the cattle drive." Levi touched the brim of his hat in acknowledgement. "Howard, found Miss Forrester stuck in the mud about 20 miles out. Thought I'd see her safely to town." Howard's eyebrows rose slightly, and he glanced between the two with evident curiosity. "Well, that was fortunate for you, Miss Forrester. Levi Yates knows this territory better than most." "I'm very grateful for his assistance," Delilah affirmed. "I might still be out there otherwise." Howard nodded, then gestured toward the hotel. "Well, you must be exhausted. Let's get you settled, and then we can discuss the teaching position once you've had a chance to rest and refresh yourself." Delilah turned to Levi, suddenly reluctant to part ways with the man who had been her protector and guide. "Mr. Yates, I don't know how to thank you properly." "No thanks needed," he replied, his expression once again unreadable. "Just doing what anyone would do." "Not anyone," she insisted. Few would have gone so far out of their way. An awkward moment passed as neither seemed to know what else to say. Finally, Howard broke the silence. "Yates, why don't you help bring Miss Forrester's belongings inside? Room 3 is prepared for her." Levi hesitated, then nodded. As they unloaded the wagon, Delilah tried several times to engage him in conversation, but his responses were brief and noncommittal. It was as if, now that they had reached their destination, he was already withdrawing from her life. Once her trunks and boxes were safely installed in a small but clean room on the hotel's upper floor, the moment of farewell could no longer be delayed. "Will you be staying in town?" Delilah asked, hoping the answer might be yes. Levi shook his head. "Need to get back to the ranch. Spring calving starts soon, and I'm already behind on preparations." "Of course," she said, unable to hide her disappointment. "Well, perhaps I'll see you in town sometime." "Perhaps," he agreed, though his tone suggested otherwise. He hesitated, then held out his hand. "Good luck with your teaching, Miss Forrester. Riverton's lucky to have you." Delilah took his hand, surprised by the gentleness of his grip despite his calloused palm. "Thank you for everything, Mr. Yates. I won't forget your kindness." Something flickered in his eyes, regret, perhaps, or some unspoken thought, but it was quickly suppressed. With a final nod, he turned and walked away, his tall figure soon lost among the pedestrians on the busy street. Delilah watched him go, a strange emptiness settling in her chest. It made no sense to feel such loss at the departure of a man she had known for barely 24 hours. Yet as she turned back to the hotel, she couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just slipped through her fingers. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity as Delilah settled into her new role and surroundings. The school board had been impressed by her credentials and apparent determination, confirming her appointment immediately. The schoolhouse itself was a simple but sturdy structure at the edge of town, with rows of wooden desks facing a blackboard and teacher's desk on a slightly raised platform. Delilah threw herself into preparations for the coming term, cataloging available books, developing lesson plans, and meeting parents and future students. The work was absorbing, allowing her little time to dwell on thoughts of Levi Yates, though his face often appeared in her mind during quiet moments. Her accommodation had been arranged in a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Perkins, a cheerful woman with a gift for baking and gathering information. Through her, Delilah learned more about the town and its inhabitants, including occasional mentions of the Yates Ranch that she absorbed with perhaps more interest than was entirely appropriate. "Fine cattle operation," Mrs. Perkins had commented during dinner one evening. "Started from nothing 5 years ago, now one of the most successful in the county. That Levi Yates may keep to himself, but he's got a good head for business. He seems capable, Delilah had replied, trying to sound merely polite rather than intensely curious. Mrs. Perkins had given her a knowing look. More than capable, dear, and not hard on the eyes either from what I hear the younger ladies say. Not that he pays them any mind. Some say he's still grieving his wife. His wife? Delilah had asked, unable to contain her surprise. Levi had never mentioned being married. Oh yes, died in childbirth, they say, before he came west. Never speaks of it himself, mind you, but that's the story that follows him. Explains why he keeps so much to himself, poor man. This information had given Delilah much to contemplate. It certainly explained the sadness she had sensed beneath his stoic exterior, the way he held himself apart. It also made her feel oddly protective of him, wishing she could somehow ease a pain she understood all too well, the pain of irrevocable loss. On Saturday morning, 10 days after her arrival in Riverton, Delilah decided to visit the general store to purchase supplies for her classroom. The store was crowded with weekend shoppers, and she had to maneuver carefully between farmers' wives comparing fabric and children eyeing the candy jars longingly. She was examining slates when a familiar voice behind her sent a jolt of recognition through her body. "Miss Forrester, I see you've settled in." Delilah turned to find Levi Yates standing a few feet away, his tall frame somehow more imposing in the confined space of the store than it had been in the open wilderness. He was cleanly shaved now, his clothes less trail-worn, but his eyes were the same clear blue and watchful. "Mr. Yates," she managed, hoping her voice didn't betray how her heart had accelerated at the sight of him. "Yes, quite well, thank you. Riverton has been most welcoming." He nodded, glancing at the slates in her hands. "Preparing for classes. Yes, we begin on Monday. 28 students enrolled so far, ranging from 6 to 16 years old. Sounds challenging." "I prefer to think of it as stimulating," she replied with a smile. "Different ages mean different abilities and perspectives. It keeps teaching interesting." A faint, answering smile softened his features. "I can see why the board was eager to hire you." He hesitated, then added, "How are you finding Mrs. Perkins's boarding house?" Surprised that he knew where she was staying, Delilah responded, "Very comfortable. Mrs. Perkins is an excellent cook and a wealth of local information." "That's one way of putting it," Levi said dryly. "Others might call her the town's foremost gossip." "She means well," Delilah defended, though she couldn't entirely disagree with his assessment. "Most gossips do," he acknowledged. An awkward pause followed before he continued. "I actually came into town for supplies, but I also wanted to check if you had settled in all right. The journey was more difficult than it should have been." Delilah was touched by his concern. "Thanks to your help, I arrived safely and on time. I never properly thanked you." "You did," he assured her. "More than necessary." Another silence fell between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. Around them, the store bustled with activity, but Delilah was aware only of Levi's presence and the strange tension that seemed to stretch between them like an invisible thread. "Will you be in town long?" she finally asked. "Just the day," he replied. "Got supplies to pick up, then heading back to the ranch." Delilah nodded, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course, you must be busy with the spring calving." "It's been a good season so far," he confirmed. He seemed about to say more when they were interrupted by the storekeeper calling his name. "Yates, your order's ready when you are." Levi acknowledged the man with a raised hand, then turned back to Delilah. "I should go." "Yes, of course," she said quickly. "It was nice seeing you again, Mr. Yates." He hesitated, then said in a lower voice, "I was wondering if perhaps you might. That is, would you consider having dinner at the hotel restaurant before I head back, as a proper welcome to Riverton?" The invitation surprised and delighted her, though she tried to maintain a composed expression. "That would be lovely, thank you. 6 o'clock, he suggested. 6 would be perfect." With a nod that might have been covering relief, Levi touched his hat brim and moved toward the counter where his supplies awaited. Delilah watched him go, a warm glow of anticipation spreading through her chest. Only after he had left the store did she realize she was still clutching the slate, and that several nearby customers were regarding her with undisguised interest. Flushing slightly, she completed her purchases and headed back to the boarding house, her mind already preoccupied with what she would wear that evening. Mrs. Perkins nearly dropped her rolling pin when Delilah informed her of the dinner invitation. "Levi Yates asked you to dinner." She repeated incredulously. "Levi Yates, who hasn't socialized voluntarily in the 5 years he's lived here. We're merely acquaintances," Delilah explained, uncomfortably aware of how much significance the widow was attaching to a simple meal. "He helped me reach town safely, nothing more, Mrs." Perkins was unconvinced. Well, you'll need to wear your blue dress, it brings out your eyes, and let me help you with your hair. A French twist, I think, with those pearl pins you have." Despite her protests that the dinner was not a romantic engagement, Delilah found herself submitting to Mrs. Perkins's enthusiastic preparations. By the time 6 o'clock approached, she was indeed wearing the blue dress, her honey blonde hair elegantly arranged, and feeling far more nervous than a simple dinner between acquaintances warranted. She arrived at the hotel restaurant precisely at 6 to find Levi already waiting, dressed in clean dark trousers and a pressed white shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He had clearly made an effort with his appearance as well, his brown hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. He rose when he saw her, a look of appreciation briefly crossing his features before he schooled them back to polite neutrality. "Miss Forrester, you look lovely." "Thank you, Mr. Yates," she replied, taking the seat he held for her, "and thank you for the invitation." The hotel restaurant was Riverton's finest dining establishment, with white tablecloths, proper silverware, and a menu that aspired to Eastern sophistication despite the frontier setting. As they settled into their meal, the initial awkwardness between them gradually melted away, replaced by the same comfortable rapport they had developed during their journey. "Tell me about your students," Levi prompted, as they enjoyed surprisingly good beefsteak. "Any troublemakers I should warn you about?" Delilah laughed. "I've met most of them now, and they seem a good bunch overall. There's a boy named Timothy Jenkins, who I suspect will test boundaries, and the Thompson twins appear to have mischief in their blood, but nothing I haven't handled before. The Jenkins boy's father is one of my ranch hands," Levi noted. "Good worker, though he struggles with the boy since his mother passed last year." "I didn't know," Delilah said, her heart going out to the child. "I'll keep that in mind when dealing with him." Their conversation flowed easily from there, touching on the school, the town's development, and eventually more personal topics. Delilah found herself sharing stories of her childhood in Missouri and her teaching experiences in St. Louis that she had told few others. Levi, in turn, revealed glimpses of his life before Wyoming, his upbringing in Virginia, his reluctant participation in the war, his journey west. What he didn't mention was a wife or her loss, and Delilah didn't ask, respecting what was clearly a painful subject. If he chose to tell her someday, that would be his decision. As the evening progressed, Delilah became increasingly aware of the glances from other diners. Their dinner was evidently causing quite a stir among the local population. "We're attracting attention," she noted quietly after catching a particularly blatant stare from an elderly couple at a nearby table. Levi grimaced. "Small town. Not much happens that isn't discussed thoroughly by everyone. Does it bother you? She asked curiously. He considered this. Used to. Now I mostly ignore it, though I apologize if it makes you uncomfortable. It doesn't, she assured him. I'm just surprised at how interested they seem in two people simply having dinner. A sardonic smile lifted one corner of his mouth. It's not just two people having dinner, Miss Forrester. It's the new school teacher dining with the reclusive rancher. By tomorrow, half the town will be convinced we're secretly engaged. Delilah laughed, though she felt a blush rising to her cheeks. How absurd! We've barely just met. Precisely, he agreed, though something in his eyes made her wonder if he found the idea as ridiculous as he claimed. As the evening drew to a close, Levi insisted on escorting her back to the boarding house. They walked slowly through Riverton's quiet streets, the spring night air cool but pleasant. Stars glittered overhead in a velvet sky, and somewhere in the distance, a piano played in one of the saloons. "Thank you for dinner," Delilah said as they approached Mrs. Perkins's establishment. "I enjoyed it tremendously." "As did I," Levi replied. They paused at the gate, neither seeming eager to end the evening. "When does the school term begin?" "Monday morning," she answered. 8 o'clock sharp." He nodded, then asked with apparent casualness, "Would it be acceptable if I called on you next Saturday? Perhaps a ride around the area. You should know more about the territory if you're to teach here." Joy surged through Delilah at the prospect of seeing him again. "I would like that very much." "Good," he said simply. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he took her hand and raised it briefly to his lips, a gesture so unexpected and gentlemanly that it left her momentarily speechless. "Good night, Miss Forrester." "Good night, Mr. Yates," she managed to reply, her hand tingling where his lips had touched. She watched him walk away, his tall figure silhouetted against the starlit sky, before turning to enter the boarding house. Mrs. Perkins was predictably waiting up, eager for details. But Delilah provided only the barest information before retreating to her room. There, in the privacy of her small chamber, she allowed herself to acknowledge what she had been trying to deny. Since their first meeting, she was developing feelings for Levi Yates that went far beyond gratitude or friendship. Whether that was wise, given their brief acquaintance and his mysterious past, remained to be seen. But as she prepared for bed, Delilah found herself eagerly anticipating Saturday and whatever it might bring. The first week of school passed in a blur of activity. Delilah's days were filled with lessons, discipline, encouragement, and the countless small tasks that made up a teacher's life. The children, while occasionally rowdy and often challenging, responded well to her firm but kind approach. Even Timothy Jenkins, the bereaved boy Levi had mentioned, seemed to warm to her after she took special care to praise his excellent penmanship. By Friday afternoon, Delilah was exhausted but satisfied with the week's progress. As she was tidying the schoolroom after dismissal, a knock at the door interrupted her work. She turned, expecting perhaps a parent or one of the school board members, only to find Levi standing in the doorway. "Mr. Yates," she exclaimed, unable to hide her surprise and pleasure. "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." He remained in the doorway, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncertain. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I was in town on business and thought I'd check how your first week went." "Please come in," she invited, hastily clearing a stack of primers from a chair. "The children just left, so excuse the disarray." Levi entered, glancing around the schoolroom with evident interest. "Looks like a proper school now. Last time I saw this building, it was still being used to store grain." "The transformation is remarkable," Delilah agreed, watching as he examined the maps she had hung on the walls and the books arranged on shelves. The town has been generous with supplies. They know the value of education, he said, stopping before the chalkboard where she had written out the next day's arithmetic problems. Though I'm not sure I could solve these myself anymore. Delilah smiled. I'm sure you could with a little practice. The mind doesn't forget such things entirely. He turned to face her, and she was struck again by how his presence seemed to fill the room, making it feel simultaneously smaller and more significant. How was your first week? Truthfully. Challenging, she admitted. 28 students of different ages and abilities require considerable juggling, but also rewarding. They're eager to learn, most of them. And the Jenkins boy, her expression softened. He's struggling, as you suggested he might be, but he has a quick mind when he applies himself. Levi nodded, seemingly pleased by her assessment. His father will be glad to hear it. He worries about the boy. A comfortable silence fell between them as Levi continued to survey the classroom and Delilah continued to arrange books. There was something domestic about the scene. She realized, like a husband visiting his wife's workplace, sharing the events of their day. The thought brought a flush to her cheeks that she hoped he wouldn't notice. "Are we still on for tomorrow?" he asked eventually. "The ride I mentioned." "Absolutely," she confirmed. "Though I should warn you, it's been some time since I've ridden. We had to sell our horses after my father's illness." "I'll bring a gentle mare," he promised, "and we needn't go far if you're uncomfortable." "I'm sure it will come back to me," she assured him. Like arithmetic. This drew a genuine smile from him, a rare enough occurrence that Delilah found herself momentarily dazzled by the transformation it wrought in his features. "Until tomorrow, then. Shall I collect you at 10? 10 would be perfect." After he left, Delilah found it difficult to concentrate on her remaining tasks. The anticipation of spending several hours in Levi's company the following day filled her with a giddy excitement that she hadn't felt in years, perhaps ever. It was too soon, she told herself. Too soon to be feeling this way about a man she barely knew. A man with his own complicated past and sorrows. Yet when Saturday morning arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, mild temperatures, and a gentle breeze, it seemed to Delilah like an endorsement of her hopes for the day. She dressed carefully in her riding skirt and jacket, a practical outfit that nonetheless flattered her figure. Mrs. Perkins, who had been beside herself with excitement since learning of the planned outing, insisted on arranging Delilah's hair in a style that would remain neat under a hat while still looking attractive. "Not that you need help catching his eye," the widow commented as she secured the last pin. "The way he looked at you when he came to collect you for dinner. Well, I've seen that look before." "Mrs. Perkins, please," Delilah protested, though she couldn't help asking, "What look?" The older woman patted her shoulder. "The look of a man who's been in darkness suddenly glimpsing light. Now, don't keep him waiting." Levi arrived precisely at 10, leading 2 horses, his own powerful bay gelding and a smaller, dappled gray mare that regarded Delilah with gentle curiosity. "This is Willow," he introduced, handing Delilah the mare's reins. "She's steady and sweet-tempered. Perfect for someone getting back in the saddle." "She's beautiful," Delilah said, stroking the horse's velvet nose. The mare nuzzled her hand in response, and Delilah felt an immediate affinity with the animal. With Levi's assistance, she mounted, finding that her body remembered the proper posture and grip even after years away from riding. They set off at an easy pace, Levi leading them out of town along a well-traveled trail that followed a winding creek. "I thought we'd head toward Broken Ridge," he explained as they rode side by side. "There's a view from there that shows most of the valley. Good for understanding the geography you'll be teaching about." The day was perfect for riding, warm enough to be comfortable, yet with a refreshing breeze that carried the scent of sage and wildflowers. As they traveled, Levi pointed out landmarks and shared local history. He was a natural teacher in his own way, Delilah realized, with a deep knowledge of the land and its stories. The Arapaho called this valley the Bowl of Many Waters, he told her as they paused to rest the horses beside the creek. Springs come up from the limestone beneath, feeding streams all year round. That's why this area stayed green even in the worst droughts. How do you know so much about the Arapaho? Delilah asked curiously. Levi's expression grew more solemn. Spent time with them when I first came west. An old medicine man named Two Bears took a notion to educate me about their ways. Said I looked like a man who needed to learn balance. Was he right? Levi considered this, his eyes on the distant mountains. He was. After the war I was. Lost. Angry at a world that had taken so much from so many for so little purpose. He glanced at her. Two Bears taught me to see beyond my own pain, to recognize that every living thing has its purpose and its place in the greater whole. It was the most personal revelation he had shared with her, and Delilah sensed the significance of his trust. Did it help, finding that perspective? Some, he acknowledged. Enough to keep going, to build something instead of just drifting. He straightened, as if uncomfortable with having revealed so much. We should continue if we're to reach Broken Ridge by noon. As they rode on, the landscape gradually changed. The gentle creek valley gave way to more rugged terrain, with scattered pine trees and occasional rock formations breaking the rolling grassland. Willow proved to be exactly as promised, steady and responsive, easily navigating the increasingly challenging trail. You ride well for someone who hasn't been on horseback in years, Levi observed as they began the final climb toward Broken Ridge. Thank you, Delilah replied, pleased by the compliment. My father insisted I learn properly when I was young. He said a person should always have skills beyond books and numbers. Wise man, Levi commented, echoing what he had said during their journey to Riverton. He was, she agreed, a familiar pang of loss tempering her enjoyment of the day. I wish he could have seen Wyoming. He always wanted to travel west. Levi glanced at her, understanding in his eyes. Perhaps he has through you. The simple statement touched Delilah deeply. It was exactly the kind of perspective that might have brought comfort during the darkest days after her parents' deaths, had anyone thought to offer it. I hadn't considered that. Thank you. They reached the summit of Broken Ridge just as the sun reached its zenith. The view, as Levi had promised, was spectacular, a panoramic vista of the entire valley, with the town of Riverton visible as a cluster of buildings beside the silver ribbon of the river, surrounded by a patchwork of farms, ranches, and wild country stretching to distant mountain ranges. It's breathtaking, Delilah murmured, trying to absorb the vastness of the landscape spread before her. This is why I stayed, Levi said quietly. First time I saw this view, something inside me recognized it as the place I was meant to be. They dismounted, allowing the horses to graze while they shared the lunch. Levi had packed cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apples, with a bottle of surprisingly good cider. They sat on a sun-warmed rock, the valley spread before them like a living map. There's my ranch. Levi pointed to a distant property where buildings and corrals were just visible. About 5 miles northeast of town. 2,000 acres, though I lease grazing rights on another 1,000 from the government. It looks substantial, Delilah commented, impressed by the scope of his operation. You've built all that in 5 years. Started small, he explained. 100 acres and 50 head of cattle. Worked hard, had some luck, made good decisions more often than bad ones. There was no boasting in his tone, just a matter-of-fact account of his achievements. "You should be proud," she told him sincerely. "Few men could accomplish so much in such a short time, especially starting alone." "Not entirely alone," he corrected. "Had good hands from the beginning. Men who knew the business better than I did, and were willing to teach a greenhorn from Virginia." Their conversation drifted to other topics as they enjoyed their meal, books they had read, places they had seen, hopes for the future. Delilah found herself speaking more freely than she had with anyone since her parents' deaths, sharing both joys and sorrows without reservation. Levi, too, seemed to lower his guard, revealing glimpses of the thoughtful, intelligent man behind the taciturn rancher's exterior. As the afternoon waned, they reluctantly prepared to return to town. Gathering their belongings and remounting the horses, they took a last look at the spectacular view before starting down the trail. "Thank you for bringing me here," Delilah said. "I understand Wyoming better now and why you love it." "I'm glad," Levi replied simply, but the warmth in his eyes said more than words could express. They rode back at a leisurely pace, taking a different route that led them through a narrow valley where wildflowers carpeted the ground in brilliant patches of color. Neither seemed in any hurry to end the day, and they stopped often to examine an interesting plant, to watch a hawk soaring overhead, or simply to appreciate a particularly beautiful view. It was during one such pause, as they stood beside their horses near a small spring, that something shifted between them. Perhaps it was the way the late afternoon light gilded Delilah's hair, or how Levi's eyes reflected the endless blue of the Wyoming sky. Whatever the catalyst, the comfortable companionship that had characterized their day together suddenly charged with a different kind of energy. Levi took a step closer to her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "Delilah," he said, using her given name for the first time, "I need to tell you something." Her heart quickened at his tone and proximity. "Yes," he hesitated, seeming to struggle with his words. "I haven't felt this way about anyone in a very long time, perhaps ever. It's unexpected." "For me as well," she admitted softly, "but not unwelcome." His eyes searched hers, seeking confirmation of what he had just heard. "We've known each other hardly any time at all. By rights, I should wait, court you properly as you deserve. Perhaps Wyoming has different rights than St. Louis," she suggested, a smile playing at her lips despite the gravity of the moment. "Perhaps it does," he agreed, his own mouth curving slightly. Then, with careful deliberation, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened as Delilah responded, her hands coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. Levi rested his forehead against hers, his hands cradling her face with infinite tenderness. "I didn't plan this," he murmured. "Nor did I," she assured him, "but I'm not sorry it happened." He drew back slightly to look into her eyes. "Neither am I. But Delilah, there are things about me, about my past, that you should know before this goes any further." She knew instinctively he was referring to his late wife, the loss Mrs. Perkins had mentioned. "You can tell me anything, Levi. Whatever it is, it won't change what I'm beginning to feel for you." He took a deep breath, then led her to a fallen log where they could sit side by side. Still holding her hand, he began to speak, his voice low and measured. "When I was 22, just before the war began, I married my childhood sweetheart, Alina. We'd known each other all our lives, grown up on neighboring plantations in Virginia. It seemed inevitable that we would marry." He paused, his eyes on their joined hands. "She became pregnant almost immediately. We were overjoyed, planning for the future when the war broke out." Delilah squeezed his hand gently, encouraging him to continue. "I enlisted, like most young men from Virginia, believed in the cause, or thought I did. Eleanor was 7 months along when I left for the front. His voice tightened. I received a letter 3 weeks later. She had gone into labor early. Both she and the baby died before help could arrive. "Oh, Levi," Delilah whispered, her heart aching for his loss. "I'm so sorry." He nodded acknowledgement, his jaw working as he controlled his emotions. "I received the news just before Antietam. Fought that battle in a fog of grief and rage. Survived when many didn't, though I didn't particularly care if I lived or died." She remained silent, sensing he needed to tell the story in his own way. "After the war, I couldn't go back to Virginia. Too many memories, and the plantation was in ruins anyway. Drifted west, working odd jobs until I ended up in Wyoming territory." His eyes lifted to the distant mountains. "Something about this place. It didn't heal me exactly, but it gave me room to breathe again, to build something new." Delilah understood completely. Wasn't that exactly what she had been seeking in coming to Riverton? A place to breathe, to begin again. "I told you this," Levi continued, finally meeting her eyes again, "because I need you to understand. Until I met you, I never thought I would or could feel this way about another woman. Never wanted to. Eleanor's memory was enough. And now," Delilah asked softly, his expression gentled, "now I find myself thinking of the future again, a different future than the one I lost." He touched her cheek lightly. "Because of you." The simple honesty of his words moved her deeply. "I lost my future too when my parents died," she told him. "Not the same way, but the life I had planned, the security I had always known, it all vanished overnight. Coming to Riverton was an act of desperation as much as courage." "And now?" He echoed her earlier question. She smiled, feeling a certainty she hadn't experienced in years. "Now I'm beginning to think that sometimes what seems like an ending is really just a different beginning." Levi's answering smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and grief. He leaned forward to kiss her again, a kiss filled with promise and possibility. The sun was setting by the time they finally returned to Riverton, the western sky ablaze with color. They rode side by side, occasionally exchanging glances that spoke volumes more than words could express. Something profound had shifted between them on Broken Ridge, a mutual recognition of kindred spirits, of shared loss and the courage to risk love again. As they approached the boarding house, Delilah was acutely aware that their magical day was ending. "Will I see you tomorrow?" she asked, trying to keep the eagerness from her voice. "I have to return to the ranch tonight," Levi replied regretfully. "Spring roundup starts Monday and there's much to prepare. But I'll be back in town next Saturday if that's not too long to wait." "It seems like forever," she admitted with a smile to soften the candid response. "But I understand. Your ranch must come first." He helped her dismount in front of Mrs. Perkins's gate, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps longer than strictly necessary. "Not first," he corrected quietly. "But it does require attention, especially at this time of year." They stood close together in the gathering twilight, reluctant to part despite the curious glances from passers-by. Finally, Levi took her hand and raised it to his lips. "Until Saturday, then." "Until Saturday," she echoed, her skin tingling where his lips had touched. He mounted his horse with fluid grace, looking down at her with an expression that warmed her from within. "Delilah," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "thank you for today, for everything." Then he was gone, riding away toward his ranch with Willow's reins in hand, leaving Delilah standing at the gate with her heart fuller than it had been in years. The week that followed was simultaneously the longest and shortest of Delilah's life, long in the hours she spent waiting for Saturday to arrive, yet short in how quickly her days filled with teaching and community involvement. Word had evidently spread about her outing with Levi, as several of her students asked innocent but pointed questions about Mr. Yates's ranch and whether she had enjoyed the view. The adults of Riverton were more circumspect but no less interested, judging by the speculative glances she received at church on Sunday, and the sudden increase in parents wishing to discuss their children's education in person. Despite the gossip, or perhaps because of it, Delilah found herself being welcomed more warmly into the community. Invitations arrived for dinners, socials, and committee meetings. The ladies of the town seemed to have collectively decided that a woman who had captured the attention of Levi Yates was someone worth knowing better. By the time Saturday arrived, Delilah was both excited and nervous. What if their connection had been a fleeting thing, a moment of shared emotion that wouldn't sustain itself? What if Levi had reconsidered during their week apart? Her worries evaporated the moment she saw him riding down the street toward the boarding house. Even from a distance, the eagerness in his posture and the warmth in his eyes when he spotted her waiting by the gate told her that nothing had changed except perhaps that his feelings, like hers, had only strengthened with separation. "I missed you," were his first words as he dismounted, the simple declaration more meaningful coming from a man usually so reserved with his emotions. "And I you," she replied, happiness bubbling through her like a spring. He had come prepared with a picnic and a plan to show her more of the area surrounding Riverton. They spent the day exploring hidden valleys, discovering crystalline pools fed by underground springs, and watching eagles soar above rocky cliffs. Throughout it all, they talked about their pasts, their present circumstances, and increasingly about a future that seemed to include them both. As the weeks passed, their Saturday outings became a cherished ritual. Sometimes they rode into the wilderness, sometimes they attended town events together, and occasionally they simply spent quiet hours reading and talking in Mrs. Perkins's parlor, with the widow maintaining a discreet but vigilant presence nearby. With each meeting, the bond between them deepened, transcending initial attraction to become something more profound, a partnership of minds and hearts that neither had expected to find. By early summer, Levi was calling on Delilah several evenings a week in addition to their Saturdays together. The school term had ended for the summer break, giving her more free time, though she had agreed to tutor several students and was busy planning improvements to the curriculum for the fall term. On a perfect June evening, 6 weeks after their first kiss on Broken Ridge, Levi invited Delilah to dinner at the hotel restaurant once again. She accepted eagerly, though she noted a certain tension in his manner that hadn't been present in recent weeks. "Is everything all right?" she asked as they walked arm in arm toward the hotel. "You seem preoccupied." "Just thinking about the future," he replied, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Nothing to worry about." The restaurant had prepared a special table for them by the window, with fresh flowers and their finest china. Levi had clearly made arrangements in advance, making Delilah wonder what occasion they might be celebrating. Their meal was delicious, and the conversation as engaging as always. Yet Delilah couldn't shake the feeling that Levi was building toward something important. Her suspicion was confirmed when, after dessert had been served and they were enjoying coffee, he reached across the table to take her hand. "Delilah," he began, his voice steady despite the nervous light in his eyes, "these past weeks have been the happiest I can remember. You've brought joy back into my life when I thought that part of me was gone forever." Her heart began to race as she realized what might be coming. "You've done the same for me, Levi." He nodded, a smile briefly lighting his features before he continued more seriously. "I know it hasn't been long by conventional standards. Some might say we're rushing things. But I think when you find something this rare, this precious, time becomes less relevant than certainty." "I agree," she said softly, hardly daring to breathe. Levi reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I had to ride all the way to Cheyenne to find this," he explained as he opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a perfect sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds. The jeweler said the blue stone reminded him of the Wyoming sky. "It reminded me of the day we spent on Broken Ridge, when I knew for certain that my heart belonged to you." Tears of joy sprang to Delilah's eyes as Levi left his chair to kneel beside hers, oblivious to the sudden hush that had fallen over the restaurant as other diners realized what was happening. "Delilah Forrester," he said, his voice clear and unwavering, "would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, her vision blurring with happy tears. "Yes, with all my heart." The restaurant erupted in applause as Levi slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to embrace her, sealing their engagement with a kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. News of their engagement spread through Riverton with remarkable speed. By noon the following day, it seemed every resident knew that the schoolteacher and the rancher were to be married. Congratulations poured in from all quarters, along with a few good-natured comments about how quickly Levi had managed to court and propose once he finally set his mind to it. They agreed on an August wedding, giving them time to prepare while still allowing them to begin their married life together before the school term resumed in September. The timing would also work well with the ranch calendar, falling after the summer cattle drives, but before the fall roundup. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Delilah ordered a wedding dress from Denver, worked with the ladies of Riverton to plan the ceremony and reception, and began the process of moving her belongings to the ranch house. Levi, meanwhile, undertook renovations to make the house more suitable for a woman's comfort, adding a proper bathroom, expanding the kitchen, and furnishing a room to serve as Delilah's study. 2 weeks before the wedding, Levi surprised Delilah by asking her to accompany him to the ranch for dinner. "I want you to see the changes," he explained, "to make sure everything meets with your approval before you move in permanently." Delilah had visited the ranch several times during their courtship, but not since the renovations had been completed. As they crested the final hill and the property came into view, she gasped in delighted surprise. The ranch house, originally a simple but solid structure, had been transformed. A wide porch now wrapped around 3 sides, window boxes overflowed with flowers, and fresh white paint gleamed in the afternoon sun. "Levi, it's beautiful," she exclaimed as he helped her down from the buggy. "Wait until you see inside," he replied, his pleasure in her reaction evident. The interior renovations were equally impressive. The main living area had been opened up and brightened with larger windows and whitewashed walls. New furniture created comfortable seating areas, and bookshelves lined one wall, ready for Delilah's collection. The kitchen boasted a modern cast-iron stove, ample workspace, and built-in cabinets that any homemaker would envy. "This is where I thought you might want your study," Levi said, leading her to a sunny room overlooking a meadow where wildflowers nodded in the breeze. For lesson planning and correspondence. The room was perfect, spacious yet cozy, with a beautiful desk positioned to take advantage of the view. But what brought tears to Delilah's eyes was the detail. Levi had included a framed photograph of her parents that she had once shown him, placed carefully on the desk, as if they were already watching over her new home. "How did you get this?" she asked, touching the frame gently. "Had a copy made in Cheyenne," he explained. "Wanted them to be part of your new beginning here." It was such a thoughtful gesture, so perfectly aligned with what would matter most to her, that Delilah could only express her feelings by wrapping her arms around him and holding tight. "Thank you," she whispered against his chest, "for understanding." Their dinner that evening, a simple but delicious meal of roast chicken, fresh vegetables from the ranch garden, and apple pie, felt like a glimpse into their future life together. As they sat on the porch afterward, watching the sun set behind the distant mountains, Delilah was filled with a sense of rightness, of having found exactly where and with whom she belonged. "In 2 weeks, this will be our home," she mused, her head resting against Levi's shoulder. "It hardly seems real." "Believe it," he replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I've been dreaming about it since the day I pulled your wagon from the mud." She laughed softly. "That early, and here I thought you were just being a good Samaritan." "I was," he defended with a chuckle. "But something happened when I said I'd get you through to Riverton. It was like making a promise not just for that journey, but for all the journeys to come." Delilah tilted her face up to his. "And will you get me through whatever comes?" His expression grew serious as he met her gaze. "With everything I am, Delilah. Every day of our lives together." The wedding day dawned clear and warm, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of summer flowers across Riverton. The ceremony was to be held in the town's newer church, followed by a reception in the community hall that promised to be the social event of the season. Delilah prepared in a room at the back of the church, surrounded by a small group of women who had become friends during her months in Riverton. Mrs. Perkins fussed over her dress, an elegant creation of ivory silk, with delicate lace detailing, while others arranged her honey blonde hair and adjusted the veil that would soon be lifted by her husband-to-be. "You look radiant, dear Mrs. Perkins declared, stepping back to admire the finished effect. "Levi Yates won't know what hit him." Delilah smiled, too happy to mind the older woman's teasing. She did feel radiant, glowing from within with a joy that transcended the external trappings of the day, beautiful as they were. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Mr. Howard, who had agreed to escort her down the aisle in the absence of her father. "It's time, Miss Forrester," he said, his usual gruff manner softened by the occasion. "And may I say, you're the loveliest bride this town has seen." The church was filled to capacity, with people standing in the back and even peering through the windows. As the organ began the wedding march, Delilah took a deep breath and stepped into the aisle on Mr. Howard's arm. The faces of the community that had welcomed her, students, parents, shopkeepers, ranchers, blurred into a collective expression of goodwill as she moved forward. But Delilah had eyes only for the tall figure waiting at the altar, his face transformed by an expression of wonder and love that made her heart soar. Levi watched her approach as if she were a vision he could scarcely believe was real. When she reached him and Mr. Howard placed her hand in his, the connection between them was so powerful that the rest of the world seemed to fade away. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, his voice reaching to the rafters of the small church, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but meaningful, with traditional vows spoken in voices steady with conviction. When Levi slipped the gold band onto Delilah's finger to join her engagement ring, his hands were gentle yet sure, just as they had been when he helped her from the mud-trapped wagon months before. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared at last. "You may kiss your bride." Levi lifted Delilah's veil with reverent hands, then drew her close for a kiss that sealed their union, tender yet passionate, a promise of all they would share in the years to come. The congregation erupted in applause and cheers as they turned to face their community as Mr. and Mrs. Levi Yates. The reception that followed was joyous and lively, with music, dancing, abundant food, and flowing champagne brought in specially from Denver for the occasion. It seemed all of Riverton had turned out to celebrate with them. And even Levi, usually so reserved in public, was seen laughing and dancing with his new wife well into the evening. As the celebration began to wind down, Levi led Delilah to the buggy that would take them to the ranch, their home now. Rose petals showered down upon them as they made their way through the crowd, accepting final congratulations and well wishes. "Ready, Mrs. Yates?" Levi asked as he helped her into the buggy. "More than ready, Mr. Yates," she replied, her heart full to bursting with happiness. They drove away from town in the golden light of evening, the sound of cheering gradually fading behind them. Ahead lay their ranch, their future, and all the promises of a life built together. As the buggy crested the final hill, revealing the ranch house glowing warmly in the setting sun, Levi drew the horses to a stop. Turning to Delilah, he took both her hands in his. "When I found you stuck in that muddy road," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I never imagined I was finding my heart's home as well. I love you, Delilah Yates, more than I have words to express." "And I love you," she replied, tears of joy spilling onto her cheeks. "Thank you for getting me through, Levi. Not just to Riverton, but to this moment, this life we're beginning." He kissed her then, a kiss that held all the passion and tenderness of a man who had found his way back to love after believing it lost forever. And as the Wyoming sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, Levi and Delilah Yates drove the final distance to their home, hand in hand, hearts aligned, ready to face whatever journeys lay ahead together. 5 years later, Delilah stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching as Levi taught their 4-year-old son, James, to sit properly on his first pony. The little boy's laughter carried across the yard, a sound of pure joy that never failed to warm her heart. Beside her, 2-year-old Eleanor slept peacefully in her cradle, her soft cheeks flushed with the healthy color of a child raised in mountain air and sunshine. The years since their wedding had brought challenges, certainly harsh winters, fluctuating cattle prices, the inevitable adjustments of two independent people building a life together. But they had also brought a deepening of the love that had begun on that muddy road, a strengthening of the partnership that had seen them through every difficulty. Delilah continued to teach, though now she did so 3 days a week in a small schoolroom they had built on the ranch, where she educated the children of their ranch hands along with their own son. The arrangement allowed her to balance her passion for teaching with her devotion to her family, and the ranch that had become truly her home. Levi had expanded the ranch operations significantly, adding sheep to their cattle and acquiring additional land to the north. His reputation as one of the territory's most successful and fair-minded ranchers had spread, bringing offers of partnership and investment that they considered carefully together. As she watched her husband lift James high in the air, the boy's delighted squeals filling the clear Wyoming afternoon, Delilah reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a stuck wagon in the mud to a life richer than she could have imagined, the road had been neither straight nor always smooth. But with Levi beside her, steadfast, loving, and true to his promise to get her through whatever came, it had been a journey worth every step. "Mama, look," James called, waving frantically as Levi set him back on the pony. "I'm riding all by myself." "I see you, sweetheart," she called back, her heart swelling with pride and love. "You're doing wonderfully." Levi looked up, meeting her eyes across the yard. The love in his gaze, still as powerful as the day he had proposed, told her everything she needed to know. They had built something precious together, something that would endure long after they were gone. A family, a home, a legacy of love that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a rain-soaked Wyoming road. As if sensing her thoughts, Levi led the pony and their son toward the porch. When they reached her, he lifted James down and then stepped up to wrap an arm around Delilah's waist, pulling her close against his side. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Delilah leaned into his embrace, surveying the life they had created together, their children, their home, the land stretching out around them, beautiful in its wild grandeur. "Beyond words," she replied. "Beyond anything I could have dreamed." Levi's arm tightened around her, a silent affirmation of shared feelings. Together they stood watching as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, painting the Wyoming sky in the same brilliant hues that had illuminated their first kiss on Broken Ridge. Another day was ending, but their story, the story that had begun with a stuck wagon and a cowboy's promise, continued, as enduring as the land itself, and as boundless as the love that had brought them home to each other.